Thanks, Julia. First of all, let me say, I love this church. I love all of these people. This may be supposed to be about a stewardess thingy, but it's really more about thankfulness, because after I was asked to do this, you know, when you sit in just waiting for somebody, you sit in a staff meeting, all of a sudden you're doing something in church on Sunday. Just beware, which is fine. But as I thought about this week, all the various things kept coming to mind about, oh, I'm so grateful because of this happened and this happened. I'm so glad I found St. Paul and St. Andrew. And, you know, many of you know that I grew up in southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and we went at the age of 5. And about the age of 6 or 7 or so, we moved as the only missionary family, the only white family, and a mission station called Nyakatsapa, and it was very rustic, very simple. There was a grade school, basically, and my father was a minister and a missionary, and he worked with, his sermons were helping people build and teaching things like that. But what I remember from that time was my first church experiences were sitting on a sort of like a cow dung floor, polished to a high resin kind of, amongst other children on a bondi, a straw mat, listening to music, and the Wavui were very much like the black Mambazo crowd. It's just what it sounded like. And I felt the spirit. I didn't know what they were saying. I didn't know what the preachers were saying. I didn't understand the scripture, but I felt it. And that was my first probably 4 or 5 years of church. Then I went to boarding school, and I was supposed to go to Methodist. It was apartheid-like. It wasn't called that. It was supposed to be a white school Methodist church. I didn't like it, so I didn't go. I went to the Afrikaans church, which again I didn't understand, but it was fun, and they had great sales. That was wonderful. So that was another kind of church. I didn't really feel a spirit there. Throughout my years in college, I decided that the Methodist Church had nothing. They were too worried about their carpet. I left and I went to a small Catholic church that it was a very wooded area in the small town in Kentucky, and it was very rich. I still didn't have the same connection. You know, I worked for Ann Eaton, who was an executive in the United Methodist Women, or the Women's Division before that, at Interchurch Center, and she kept saying, "Come down to my church, it's really wonderful." Well, I knew half of the people that worked there came here at that point, and I really wasn't interested in that. So I kept saying, no, don't think so. So I tried other places around New York. The one place that I really sort of found a home for a while was at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, believe it or not. I worked across the street. It was the time that AIDS was just coming visible and coming to an actual name of what it was. The dean there was at people's bedside. He was praying with them. He was so real, and I really felt like this is what church is about. You know, wherever it's happening, this is real. And so I stayed there for a while, but it didn't satisfy my soul. So one fall morning in 1988, 35 years ago, I said, let me just walk down to that church that Ann keeps talking about. I was no longer working for her. So I came in the back door, or the front door on West End, and Betty Ruth Good greeted me, and she said, oh, and Ann came running up, and she said, oh, and I said, I didn't want to come here because I was going to know too many people, and they'd all know my father, too. And Betty Ruth Good says, I understand. My aunt was the same way when I was growing up, and those of you who may remember Betty Ruth would understand that. So from then on, this was home. But the biggest piece that pulled me in initially was they talked about a Bible study happening next door at the parsonage. That was at Kay and Char's house. Their parsonage was the lower parsonage at that time. And so I went. I walked in the door, and I looked around, and I thought, this feels like home. This feels like a mission house. This feels like people I know. And it was part of the Bible study, and I thought, I am home. These are family. And for somebody who loves New York, who at 9 years old decided she was going to live here, I'd always still felt kind of alone and insecure, and that left. That was gone. And I have been here ever since. I had finally found what I needed. And in those years since, I have been given such gifts of opportunities to grow in leadership, of opportunities to serve, of stretching, of sharing my ideas and hearing them heard. It has been 35 years of absolute gift to me, and I am so, so thankful. I'm also thankful that Ron, who was not interested in church, we got married in this church. Ed Horn married us. But, you know, at one time, and this is a funny story on Ron, we had a basement. We didn't have a social hall. We basically had a basement downstairs that was being remodeled. And we had a lot of stuff stored, but they had a stage. They had a lot of stuff stored for our bazaars there. And so to make money, in order to remodel this, part of the way we made money, was to have fashion shows. I was out of town, and so people were trying to get people to model and walk down the what do you call that thing? Anyway, runway. And so they asked Ron, who's tall, good looking, at that point had a very good attitude about life and himself, and well, they gave him a dressing gown to model. So he modeled the dressing gown, and not only that, he walked to the end and quickly flashed people. He got such an uproar response that he then has come to church almost every Sunday. So God works in mysterious ways to bring us to church. He even has come when I've been away from town. And I also so much appreciate that now, as our lives are changed, this church looks after Ron. People watch out for him. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm also so grateful because, you know, our life is different now. Sometimes home is kind of a lonely place, and I'm grateful to be a part of this family. So for that reason, we tithe. And we tithe, and we have to know what our accounts are and what our finances are at home to figure out what we're going to do. Same way the church needs it. So for that reason, I think that it's a really good thing to do. And I'm going to turn it over to Julia to tell you how you do it. But first, I'm going to say that as I was working on this last night, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to say, and I haven't read anything that I wrote down. I asked Ron, I said, so Ron, why do we give money? Why do we give money all the time to the church? He looked at me and says, to keep it going. So Julia will help us know how to keep it going. All right.